Well, it's the golden time of the year in western Montana. The larch have turned golden. This is western larch, which is Larix occidentalis. And this is a conifer that's playing a very unique game, a very unique strategy. As you can see, it drops its needles in the fall. So let's investigate what's so cool about western larch. How does it survive? What is the real nature of this game? And we might even meet Gus. In this grove of western larch near Seeley Lake is just absolutely outstanding. I mean, it's home to giants, and then you can see this regrowth of little western larches that are coming about. So while most conifers will hoard their leaves for years, holding on to them, larch drop their leaves, their needles, every single fall. So that single twist of dropping their needles, western larch rewire their entire physiology, fire ecology, and ecology. And we're going to investigate all of those today, hopefully. Why the needles turn, how the needles turn, the impacts of that for the larch, how they regenerate after a fire, their relationships with various ecomycorrhizal fungi. Makes you feel kind of small being here. Not insignificant, but small. Compared with their evergreen neighbors like the Doug fir, lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine, larch skewed their needles towards higher nitrogen and higher photosynthetic capacity, trading longevity for speed. All right, let's get really nerdy. So they've done gas exchange studies on western larch, and what they find out is the stomata, the little pores on the leaves, open up the biggest when we hit the low teens, maybe the mid-20s Celsius. And what that means is that they're a very high capacity, fast growing, they want sunny sites, and they take advantage of that sun. The downside of that is they don't do that well with cold weather, since maybe the strategy of just drop the needles. Why deal with the cold weather? Now here's a couple of nerdy formulas that tell you all about the photosynthesis of western larch. Western larch is one of the most fire-resistant trees in its range. The low resin bark can reach between 3 and 6 inches thick. Long, clear boles from aggressing, self-pruning, and open crowns reduce ladder fuels. Mature trees regularly survive low to moderate severity fires. And then the survivors rain down seeds onto the freshly charred soil, jump-starting the next cohort of western larch. Now, let's take a look at that bark thickness. Let's see. You can see how thick that bark is on this fire scar. So this is the protection. And then, like I said, it doesn't have a lot of resin, so this bark is literally like a fire-resistant layer for the larch. And you can see the fire scar going up. And then look how there's no branches on the middle of the tree, and then that canopy is way up there, which doesn't allow the fire to get up there and burn it. So this tree is a survivor. So as you can see, these big larch survive a fire, and so it makes larch an early cereal species after a fire. They're the establishment cores after everything else has been nuked on the forest floor. They're the conifer that comes in first and comes in fast to reestablish itself. Even when a western larch dies, it still plays a valuable role in the ecosystem. So as we look at this snag, we can see all the excavations by pileated woodpeckers. So as this is getting eaten upon by various insects, that's the food for the pileated woodpeckers. So they're coming in here and eating on this larch. Beyond the golden color in the fall, the identification of western larch is fairly straightforward. So if you look at these needle structures, they're almost in whorls. You'll see that the needles are almost in whorls. So we'll kind of hopefully isolate this guy a little bit. And you can see how around that central point, there's like 15 to 30 needles around that central point. So it's born from a single point, right there, sorry. Born from a single point. And there's all those wonderfully deciduous needles. They're flattened. So, they're on one plane, they're very flat, as hopefully you can see. The other thing on western larch is really cool is on the young trees, the bark is fairly thin. It seems very thin. And yet, by the time they mature, like this beast over here, that bark is 3 to 6 inches thick. Look at the cones. This is a western larch cone. So you see there's this kind of this ovate egg shape, and they have scales that go, they have bracts that go a little bit past the scales. And for comparison, in my hand, I have a Doug fir cone and a western larch cone. So these little tiny cones are the western larch. Western larch usually start their pollination process about mid-April through mid-May, right at the spring outbreak, the spring vegetative outbreak. So this is when they're dispersing pollen all through this forest. And hopefully within those little ovate coins, but hopefully in those little ovate cones, they're creating new seeds in the next generation of western larch. So the cones will eventually drop from the treetops, hit the ground, and there they sit. And they sit until there's a fire. Remember how we were talking about how western larch is an early cereal species? Right after the fire is when they are growing, they're doing their best, they're getting all these young trees started. And once they're disturbed by fire, they go like gangbusters until you get young trees just like this growing, that early cereal stage, that rapid succession of a post-fire forest by western larch. Larch grows so rapidly, at least for the first 100 years of the post-fire, they outpace all the other conifers. Larch favors cool, moist mid-elevations in western Montana, benches and northeast facing slopes where the snow lingers a little bit longer and the soils are soaked for just a little bit longer, staying cool. So they like mean annual temperatures somewhere around like 7°C with warm summers, long, wet, cold winters. And you want some precipitation between nearly 500 millimeters to maybe up to 1,400 millimeters. Much of this you want as snow. The soils, I gotta tell you, walking in this grove is like walking in a almost magical world of gold and silence. The other thing to think about larch is this relationship with the fungal community. So we have these little saprotrophic, and it seems like the mycelium are going through the larch needles and eating those up, eating all that lignin, putting all that carbon back in the soil. Golden is amazing. There's something good to talk about. Why are the needles golden? Well, it's much like deciduous trees, like broadleaf trees, is when the chlorophyll stops, it breaks down into other pigments, hence gold. There he is. There's Gus. Look at the size of that beast.